Hello, and welcome to the Fourth Culture. Yeah, my intention for today is to just chat a little bit about Sigil and the Planescape setting. And in part, it's because I need to refamiliarize myself with a bunch of it. And in part because since the players have now dropped themselves in it, and it is definitely one of my favorite kind of old school settings, it would be quite a bit of fun to just have a little wander around it. So the premise of Sigil comes from a campaign setting known as Planescape, which was a setting that's first introduced to, I guess, to me, but to also the general kind of D&D world in 1994. And so back in 1994, it was pre-war on terror. It was post-Berlin Wall coming down. What was the world like in 94? Pretty grim. Clinton had just taken power. I think, or just become sort of gained office, depending on how you look at that perspective. And I was a pretty substantial 17-year-old, I think, by that point, maybe 16-year-old, give or take. And so back in them days, we looked and received a box set for Planescape second edition, and it was a fine and fancy thing. Let me see if I can find. I actually have. I bought the things on DM's Guild, and this was what the box looked like. I don't recall it looking quite so beautifully pink. I actually remember it being much more this color, the sort of green and rust color. But I definitely remember the Planescape setting and this sort of very iconic and stylized imagery. The writing and everything else, and I loved it. Now, it was, I would say, very much a different type of setting from the average D&D fantasy setting, in that the Planescape setting was, before Eberron came along and before Sharn came along, it was the New York City setting. It was the giant melting pot that was where a solar sort of like, Deva type character would be able to drink with a pit fiend, and it kind of reimagined the first premises of D&D, but tried to create it inside the overall, at that time, the overall kind of system of how the planes of existence worked, and a bunch of other things like that. And actually, on that point, that's probably where I'm going to kick off, because I'm going to talk a little bit about Sigil itself. And there is a whole bunch of resources on the interwebs. The first one is this map of Sigil at a place called Nether Whisper, and it's huge. The idea being that Sigil itself, as we can see here, is around 20 miles in diameter, so you run around it, and it's a toroid, donut shape in essence, and the toroid has outer and inner edge, and it's got a very interesting way of articulating the dimension of it. So you've got the top part of the toroid and the bottom part of the toroid, and they meet at the edges, and so they go around in a curve, right? So you can go from the bottom of this map up to the top, and you can obviously walk the long way this way. So rather like slices of a donut, like this is an unrolled donut, if you will. So unrolled and flattened, I guess. Let's talk a little bit about what the premise of this game is. Now, for those of you who've played Planescape Torment, you may be familiar with some of the places on this rather beautifully built map. I don't have a attribution for this map, so I posted the website in chat. So hopefully the person who built this gorgeous map will get appropriately attributions. But it's you may recognize some of these places. You may have been through some of these places. You may recognize some of the words. Not all of them will be in the sigil that appears in our game on Monday evening, in part because we're still going to keep our goal of making this Asia-centric, and therefore I don't think we're going to pull in a bunch of the sort of relatively Judeo-Christian references that exist inside Sigil. But at the same point, the whole concept of it and the concept of there being this city of doors is something I've always been in love with ever since it came out and I first read it. So I want to show you something here that I found on the interwebs. Now, like all things found on the interwebs, it's probably fair to say that this sort of document is not legit. And what I mean by not legit is it might be a composition by a bunch of other people, and so I apologize in advance for anyone who is aware of who actually should be attributed for this work. Please let me know. I'll make sure that either we come back and we edit it back in, or we stick it in the comments underneath this video on YouTube. But what the high-level view of this is, and there's a rumor that says this is a 5th edition adaptation guide, allegedly by Chris Perkins, the lead designer or lead designer on D&D 5th edition. But he's never confirmed it's his, and who knows. It's not available on DM's Guild, and I'm certainly not. I have a copy from Gosh Only Knows When and Gosh Only Knows How. I'm sure if you were to Google something like this with Chris Perkins' name, you may come across it, but that would be entirely your choice. Now, it does a similar kind of thing where it basically says, well, look, if you're thinking about the inside of the donut, this is the inside of the donut. In essence, the map rolls up like this. And so these are the near edges and those are the far edges. Now, let's talk a little bit about where Sigil is. And I think that's probably the most interesting thing. Most D&D games happen in what's called the prime material plane. And the prime material plane is this concept that stuff exists as a combination of the things of the inner planes and the demi-planes combining into this sort of, universe as we understand it, a universe of stuff. The inner planes, this idea is like air and fire and magma and energy and negativity and all that stuff. It all kind of comes together into the prime material plane because it all blends together. Now, this is not a particularly Eastern way of describing the relationship between elements, so I don't know how relevant it's going to be to us. But what it is, however, is a bit of a D&D geography lesson, if you will. I'll get my D&D geography teacher hat on. These crystal spheres exist around the different settings. They wanted a way, how do we make it possible for people to travel from setting to setting and actually make that a setting in itself? So they came up with this thing called Spelljammer, which is this idea that says, yeah, everybody, we're going to create this setting where people can travel from one place to another in a kind of Buck Rogers-y, space piratey type way. And it's actually referenced in 5th Ed. It's quite surprising, actually. It shows up. It shows up in the in Mordenkainen's in Waterdeep, Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And I think it also shows up in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. We should review those at some point, actually. I don't think we've ever reviewed Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, and I don't think we've ever reviewed Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And that would be quite interesting. I don't think there's any spoilers for doing that now. And we've never actually been through many of the official products, actually, so that's something we may well get on to doing at some point. The point is that these different places were separated by, vast distances, and you had to reach the end of the crystal sphere, kind of real space, and then travel through a thing called the Phlogiston. Ooh, where the Phlogiston is a sort of Victorian ether type of concept, I guess. And it was so. There's a lot I liked about Spelljammer, but there's a lot that made me go, and a lot I liked about it was that it was this sort of dumping ground of everything, and therefore there was a lot that you could see in it that was pretty cool, right? I mean, it was, there existed the steampunky elements that were, that now characterize Eberron in many ways, but this is well before that. So Gith with 2 Fs, these giant hippo people with muskets, raiders in pirate ships, but they were actually these Neogi spiderling creatures who would change their themselves to be able to steal and eat people. Pretty awful stuff, right? And it had a certain Firefly-esque feeling to it, which I thought was pretty cool, actually. I quite liked that. There were lots of things that were a bit crap about it too, but then that's second edition D&D for you. The idea would be that you had these places here. Like here you have Kryn, which is the setting for Dragonlance, and here you have Athas, which is the setting for Dark Sun, which at one point we should definitely go through, because I love the Dark Sun setting. You know, it probably won't have aged particularly well, but I loved it at the time, and I haven't really revisited it very much. And Toril, which is, of course, the default setting. The Faerun is basically in Toril, and that is the Forgotten Realms, if you will. Now, how does Sigil relate to this nonsense? Well, there are a series of astral conduits. What's an astral conduit? I hear you yell. Cool. Well, an astral conduit is a path through the astral plane that then allows you to get to, and the astral plane has gateways to all the other planes. And in the classical D&D model, you have this idea that each of these planes is floating out there somewhere in the upper planes, you're floating out there in the astral sea. They're not the infinite kind of core planes. Like the plane of fire is the concept of fire in all of its manifestations, and is as much an idea as it's a place. It's an infinitely sized thing. The upper planes, the sort of outer planes, are actually things that exist inside the astral sea. As we then say, okay, well, this is the universe as we know it, and here is the inner planes, and here is the prime material plane, and here on the other side of the prime material plane is the astral sea, and the other side of the astral sea, through these astral conduits, these channels that allow you to travel from one place to the other, which are sort of like super tunnels, right? You kind of open a door on the prime material plane, and you get to one of these places, and you traverse the astral plane, but you don't actually have to enter the astral plane. Well, hey, that's all good and stuff, right? But that gets you to these sort of outer planes, right? One of the outer planes is known as the Outlands. And in the Outlands, there is a big mountain, which also appears to be Lord Shiva. And at the top of this big mountain, this rather large erection, is a donut, cock ring, whatever you wish to call it. At the top of this thing is what you would refer to as Sigil. And Sigil is a city, and it is a amazing city. It's called the City of Doors. It's ruled by this person called the Lady of Pain, who is this amazing sort of like character with deep, I think this is a fascinating character, the Lady of Pain. Further, you then get all of the fact that these places are all, you have exits to these places from Sigil. So Sigil is known as the City of Gates. And what they've done in Planescape as a setting is they've said, well, yeah, that's true, and its location is in the center of things. So because its location is in the center of things, and in the Outlands, the Wildlands, you've got the various D&D-ish sort of type of planes and their estates and everything else. And this is very kind of classical. Here is this plane, here is the spire on top of it, and then here is Sigil set on top. So what they've done is they said, well, Sigil has many, many doors, and those doors will take you to many different places, and those places will be kind of anywhere in the planar setting. So it becomes this sort of hub for travel, and it becomes a place that anybody can come to from anywhere, which is kind of amazing. So as a result, what you end up with is this city, and this city is, if you think about now what we saw earlier, this sort of toroidal city is sat above top of this spire, which is then sat on the Outlands, around which are ways of getting to all of the other planes, beyond which are these passages through the astral sea that then take you to the prime material plane, and then on the prime material plane, that's where we are, and the prime material plane is made of stuff of like raw elements, right? When you look inside Sigil itself, you then have every single place that could or would exist has a way of getting here, is the idea. Every single place here is a door to somewhere. So it doesn't matter what prime material plane, what homebrew setting you are, what official setting you are, you can get there from Sigil. Like in some cases, you couldn't get there in Spelljammer. There were rules and reasons why. For example, Kryn was supposedly in its own little bubble, and Athas apparently had suffered such an ecological trauma that they weren't able to sustain their flow gliston or whatever it is. But Sigil could take you anywhere. So how do we think of this map? How do we conceive of this map? Well, let's think, right? So The idea here is that each end kind of goes around like this. Athos is the place that all the other planeshoppers go fuck no to. That's about as spot on as it gets, because it is a ruined hell of a place. Now, so basically now the donut gets created. So you grab the ends of this map and you wrap them around, and so far that's a cylinder, and then you wrap them in so that it comes sort of the top sort of maps onto the center. So the idea being that as this is a donut, there's a big hole in the center. Right, so this is a mapped view of what happens when you opened out the donut. So if you were to travel, let's say, down to the market ward, you would carry on traveling over to the Davis Street, and then up through Glutton's Gorge and into Pemet Square and along Ladies Row and Lord's Row and Harmonium Street and Pandemonium Street, and all of these names are either fun names or they're names relating to some very specific things. And so how would I characterize Planescape as a thing? Well, the DMG talks about this, and so does the Player's Handbook a little. So start with the Player's Handbook and talk about the planes of existence. This is the official 5th edition. Glutton's Gorge, definitely on brand for the 4th culture. Yes, this is the official 5th edition definition of the planes of existence. So bear with me here, folks. We're about to go on a journey. Material planes, with a nexus of all the philosophical and elemental forces, define the planes collide in a jumbled existence of mortal life and mundane matter. Basically, all the worlds of D&D exist in the material plane, making it a starting point for most campaigns and adventures. So Urtu is in the material plane. The worlds of the material plane are infinitely diverse. That means you can roll your own and don't worry about it. But the classical ones they've talked about, Greyhawk, the original Gygax setting, Blackmoor, Dave Arneson's setting. That's right. Dragonlance, Dave Arneson was the co-creator with Gygax, and someone else. Dragonlance, which is Kryn, which is the Margaret West Tracy Hickman second. Obviously, the Forgotten Realms you talked about. Mystara, which I believe was the 3rd edition setting. Birthright, which I think was one that was really not focused on a great deal, but I think actually is surprisingly an interesting one. Matt Colville quite likes Birthright. Dark Sun, which is Athos. Eberron, of course, which is one of my favorite settings because it's so very interesting. And yeah, so the idea was, here's a bunch of different worlds. They're all in the prime material plane now, because it's all about stuff and things. So if you want to interact with stuff and things, you don't want to interact with the elements, and you don't want to interact with the ideas, then prime material plane for you. So material plane is a richly magical place, and its magical nature is reflected in the 2 planes that share its central place in the multiverse. Now, the multiverse is infinite, and this is where we'll start to diverge a bit from the cosmology of 5th edition in order to be able to express some philosophical concepts that come up in Planescape. Planescape has really got 3 core philosophical ideas at the heart of it, right? And I think it's, I'll mention them now, I'll mention them again later. But the idea being the first one, which is the rule of 3, right? The rule of 3 is that shit happens in 3s. So given that shit happens in 3, I've got 2 more rules to go through. So the second rule is the unity of rings. And basically lots of things in the planes are circular, so you're probably going to come round to where you were eventually. And it is this idea that there is a return to a particular place, whether that is due to the cyclicality of the plane itself or a more philosophical concept. And I think that is something we'll definitely be echoing and talking about as part of the Wheel of Dharma more than anything else. And of course, the third piece, which is that really is this concept that's called the center of all, as in there is a center of everything, but in a universe that is infinite and moving and growing in an infinite manner, how can you have a center? Therefore, isn't every place the center of everything and every person the center of their own universe? And I think that is another philosophical thing from Planescape as a setting, which is that everybody in the Planescape setting is far more, within some context, independent, or at least not bound to the same restrictions and rules as they might have in a different settings. So in a different setting, perhaps a pit fiend in Forgotten Realms might owe its allegiance to a particular deity. In Sigil, however, that pit fiend is the center of its own multiverse, meaning that there is a infinite number of iterations of existence, and that pit fiend may not belong or subscribe to the philosophies of another one. It could actually just be a pretty cool person hanging out, fiending in a pit. Maybe it fiends in a pit. Yeah, it helps little children eat bread and stuff. Who knows? But there's no obligation to be evil. And I think this is one of the reasons I like this setting, is because you're very clearly given the ability to subvert a bunch of tropes and obligations, which I quite like. As we then take a bit more of a look, we talk about the Feywild, which is the plane of fairy. It's a land of soft lights and wonder, a country of little people with great desires. I'm not a plane of fairy person. I'm not really a Feywild person. I've never really enjoyed it. I think it's because I'm a city boy at heart, so I don't really find the Feywild to be particularly interesting. Unlike, of course, the Shadowfell, because I am a goth at heart, and so the idea that everyone's edgelord can be taken to the nth degree, well, there we go. That's the Shadowfell for you. I just feel that the Feywild is all a bit, it's all a bit Western European Fey myth. Yeah, it's a bit too much Celtic stuff, the Wild Hunt and Herne the Hunter and everything else. All good stuff, right, if you like that kind of stuff, but I read Leoness a long time ago. I'm good with it. So, how do you travel through the plains? Well, bunch of spells. Here's a good bunch of things. I'm not going to get through this too much. I want to get to this point here, where it references sigil, or as Barra called it, symbol, or glyph, or letter. I don't know. Sigil and the Outlands. The Outlands is the plane between the outer planes, a plane of neutrality, but not the neutrality of nothingness. Instead, it incorporates a little of everything, keeping it all in a paradoxical balance, simultaneously concordant and in opposition. It is a broad region of varied terrain, with open prairies, towering mountains, and twisting shallow rivers, strongly resembling an ordinary world of the material plane. It is circular like a great wheel. In fact, those who envision the outer planes as a wheel point to the Outlands as a proof, calling it a microcosm of the planes. The argument might be circular, as many things are. However, it's possible the arrangement of the Outlands inspired the idea of the great wheel in the first place. Around the outside of the circle, evenly spaced, are the gate towns, 16 settlements, each built around a portal leading to one of the outer planes. Each town shares many of the characteristics of the plane where its gate leads. At the center of the circle, at the center of the Outlands, like the axle of a planar wheel, the spire shoots impossibly high into the sky like a giant erection. Above this thin peak floats the cock-ring-shaped city of Sigil, the city of doors. This bustling planar metropolis holds countless portals to other planes and worlds. Sigil is a trader's city. Goods, merchandise, and information come to it from across the planes. There is a brisk trade in information about the planes, in particular in the command words or item required for the operation of particular portals. These portals are highly sought after, and many travelers within the city are looking for a particular portal or a portal key to allow them to continue on their way. I think this is an important sort of concept, which is this idea of the fact that the portals exist in the Sigil, but you need keys to use them. You can't just rock up to a portal and say, let me through. You need to have this kind of ability to get a keys, and these keys are both rare and items that are jealously guarded. Also mentioned in the Outlands section of the DM's Guide. At the center of the Outlands, like the axle of a great wheel, is the spire, a needle-shaped mountain that rises high into the sky. Above this mountain's narrow peak floats the cock-ring-shaped city of Sigil. Its myriad structures built on the ring's inner rim. Creatures standing on one of the Sigil streets can see the city curve up above their head, and, most disconcerting of all, the far side of the city directly overhead. Called the City of Doors, this bustling planar metropolis holds countless portals for other planes and worlds. Sigil is a trader's paradise. Goods, merchandise, and information come here from across the planes. The city sustains a brisk trade in information about the planes, particularly the command words or items required for the operation of particular portals. Portal keys of all kinds are bought and sold here. The city is the domain of the inscrutable, I tell you, Lady of Pain, a being as old as gods and with purposes unknown to even the sages of her city. Is Sigil, or Sigil, as some people call it, her prison? Is she the fallen creator of the multiverse? Nobody knows, or if they do, they aren't telling. The main setting in Planescape, a city at the center of the multiverse called Sigil, was run by groups called factions. Each of these factions has a different outlook on the universe. Thus, by joining one of the factions or simply dealing with them as players, you're compelled to think and sometimes even argue about the nature of reality. And that is one of the things that's fascinating about Sigil and about this setting as a whole, is that it is a far more philosophical way of looking at the game of D&D itself. It's not purely just a good versus evil, up versus down, all that kind of stuff. It is substantially more than that. Now, if we have a look at the factions of Planescape. So I've got a copy, again, an old PDF of Dragon Magazine, and they did a couple of special editions about Planescape and the Sigil setting. Dragon Magazine was a bit like White Dwarf, I guess, in some ways, for the Warhammer peoples, including a whole bunch of the art and a bunch of stories and various other things like that, in order to be able to give folks insights into the content, as well as allow things that didn't make it into the final content cut or publication, or things that people wanted to publish and talk about into the book. And you can see this is April 94, right? So this is literally probably around the launch of the game itself, right? And so we can see here, there's a couple of stories, there's things about Sigil itself. This is probably the first time that you encounter a description of one of the factions. This is the Doom Guard, and then we'll come back to it. We'll look in the Sigil book in a second. Sorry, the Planescape book in a second to talk about the factions, and then you end up with some pictures and some images, just to kind of do the good things. So one of the nice things about Planescape as well is that Planescape has a whole bunch of slang, right, which I think is pretty awesome, right? So as well as the art being interesting, there was a whole chunk of interesting phrases like Adelcove. Do you know what that Adelcove wizard wanted us to do? And I think there's a parallel between Sigil and New York. As I said, there's a parallel between Sigil and Terry Pratchett's Ankh-Morpork. And there's a parallel between that and then, Cockney London in some ways, right? Especially the Cockney London as perceived by Americans. So a lot of the folks that speak in Sigil speak in a kind of strange patois or argot, which is kind of oriented towards a kind of Cockney rhyming slang. So bar that, be quiet or shut up. Anthill, city or town. Basher. It's a neutral reference to a person. It's like usually a thug or a fighter. It's like, look at that basher over there. Berk, it's a fool or a loser. So it's a way of referring to, somebody that got themselves into trouble. It's like, look at that Berk. Or for example, possibly some of the words that might come out of people if they were to meet the party would be, what are you Berks doing here? Bleaker, member of the Bleak Cabal, and we'll talk about them in a minute. To bob, which is to cheat someone. And I like the fact that they gave you all of this slang, because it made it interesting. Like a cager was somebody that inhabited the cage. The cage was, of course, a nickname for Sigil. It's called the Birdcage, because sometimes people would get trapped in Sigil without a portal key, or would get trapped in Sigil because going anywhere else would expose them to their enemies. And one of the things about Sigil is if you go there, you don't fuck around. You don't fight with people. You don't start wars. You don't bring gods into the place, because the Lady of Pain, well, she's going to make it a bad day for you. Lady of Pain is pretty rad. So we'll see if we can talk about her a bit later. Oh, man. How old is this? Remember, this is pre-internet days. Remember these? Some of you who watched the short-lived Beyond the Crystal Caverns series will notice that the imagery of the Lady of Pain is rather similar to the imagery of the lady in Urtu. That is not a coincidence, as some of you might have guessed. Sigil has always had a significant role in the game. Being a guide to Sigil and its environs, both Homesome and Nile, and being a true and accurate guide to the portals and pathways of the City of Doors, including diverse and various notes on the factions of the city and their goals and stratagems, and a faultless listing of the 6 wards and their establishments, and the secret history and intrigues of Her Serenity, the Lady of Pain. Now, as I said to you before, I have not gone through this in great detail. I bought it a while back. I haven't read it. So let's see what it says. We can learn about it together. 1,000 portals and each doorway to fame and damnation. Let's go. A Clueless on his way to Bartor, which is one of the, I believe it's one of the hells. The view from the spire and the streets. You look lost, sir. Walk with me through the murky twilight for a moment, and I'll teach you the darker things. That'd be the secrets for a clueless traveller like yourself. Mind you don't brush against the grime. There's lots of soot-stained walls here. Now, Sir Prime, look up. Makes you dizzy, doesn't it? Seeing the city of Sigil above you. See, living in an impossible city ain't always simple. You need a guide. That'll be 12 silvers. Oh, those fellows, Dabus, or Dabus. Dabus? Dabus? Dabus is late. They speak to each other with those illusions. They're servants of the City of Pain, or the Lady of Pain, who rules the City of Doors and keeps it safe. No, I don't mind the questions. It's called the City of Doors because it's the centre of the multiverse, or at least the ways a body can get anywhere from here through the city's portals. It's also called the Cage. Why? Sigil's cage for everyone. For the Celestials, for the Fiends, for the Tieflings, and for the Clueless. And for the Lady. That's why the cutters who set their cases, their homes in Sigil, call themselves cages. The cages who know the place best are us who teach. We're known as touts. My name's Eaton the Quick, and I'll do my level best to tell a cutter everything he needs to know to survive in Sigil. Not everything there is to know, mind you. That'll cost extra. Sigil's the crossroads, the great shuddering home to all the planeswalkers of the Great Ring. Under the lady's watchful and serene gaze, Sigil stays out of the politics and bloodshed of the conflicts raging through the plains, especially the lower plains, where the blood war never stops. No matter what a cutter hears, most of the plains ain't that friendly to strangers, whether they're planar or prime or something else. Whether they're living in wealth or squalor, smart cutters set up their cases in Sigil. The lady creates portals that lead everywhere, and when she wills them, she closes them. Most of the simple portals are like doorways that only take cutters elsewhere when they carry the right key, and a key could be anything. A silver blade, a secret word, or an elaborately illuminated deck of cards. Because the city's doors lead everywhere, everyone comes to Sigil, sooner or later, even if they're just passing through. That's when a sharp tout latches onto them, you see, whirls them through the sewers like in the jinx shops and takes his fee. Sure, it's not polite, but everyone's a cynic in Sigil, and the clueless pay the price for their ignorance. Oh, no, I'm not calling you ignorant, Sir Prime. You, I respect. Ethan the Quick, tout. And so, as you can see, there's this sort of blending together of a ultimately corrupt in some ways kind of place where there's a huge amount of politics and therefore a huge amount of opportunity, and people really have to hustle for a living, and then you sort of get this sort of idea like Ethan the Quick, who's there to show you around for the right price. No one knows the city better than the touts and factoids, the two professions that guide the curious and clueless through the city of Sigil. It's not you clueless screwheads. Sigil's no place for the ignorant, especially if they're arrogant. Sure, cages are arrogant past measure, but they're wise to the way of things. For anyone visiting from out of town, but especially for the clueless, guides are recommended, and their prices are reasonable, considering what they know and the risks they run. Prices are much higher if a cutter wants a guide in the hive, which will cost him dearly, though not having a guide in the hive may cost them their life. One of the nice things I like about Sigil as well, and the Planescape setting is, you get to level 10 or 12, and in most other settings, your PCs are powerful. They're very powerful. In Sigil, you probably, other than if you're born there, you probably show up around that point. You probably got to the point where you've just managed to stumble through a door, unless it's through, a full mulligan, a full MacGuffin of some sort. you probably just got to the point in your campaign where you're like, cool. Well, let's go visit Sigil, shall we? You're not the badass on the block because everyone is. Wards and mazes. Sigil's 6 wards are the Lower Ward, the Market Ward, the Clerk's Ward, the Guildhall Ward, and the Hive and the Ladies' Ward, where the richest and most powerful of them all live. So if we remember our nice diagram of Sigil here, so we have the Ladies' Ward here. This is the Ladies' Ward. The Lower Ward here, the Hive up here, and the Hive carries on sort of over here, so it kind of stretches. So remembering that the top of this bit here folds onto this bit here, and then this bit here folds onto this bit here, and then they're attached to each other like this way, lengthwise. If you wanted to construct your very own sigil, you'd print this out, you would cut around the strips, and then you would form it together into a donut. I'll do that actually. Let me see if I can print it out. See if I'll... So the idea being that then you've got the donut, as it were, which consists of the upper part and the lower part, but actually they are together. Nevertheless, you see, you've got the Ladies' Ward, which is quite large, the Lower Ward, the Hive, which is where the bruisers are, the Market Ward, the Guildhall Ward, the Clerk's Ward, and the Hive, which kind of stretches even further. So the inside of the ring, so there we go, da-dun-da-da, I don't know if you can see that. So I'm going to fold it inversely, just so that I've got something that I can follow. But it doesn't actually matter, because inside of a thing versus outside of a thing, the only difference is, of course, is that what I can see, rather than being, if I look up, right, rather than being on the inside, I would see what is on the actual opposite side. The map as it is shown, as you can see up here, is done so that it's nicely visible, and you can see that over here where you have the Hive, right, and it's the letters are all nicely the same way up. The problem is that doesn't help you when you come to actually cutting it out. So everything is this way. But nevertheless, I now have a toroid of Sigil. Must really suck to sell maps of Sigil, because you've got to sell people things like this, and they're like, I'm not doing that, mate. So you got to work on one of these. But nevertheless, the idea being that the Market Ward is next to the Ladies' Ward, next to the Lower Ward, next to the Hive, and next to the Clerk's Ward and the Guildhall, and the Market Ward comes back to itself. And you can just keep walking all the way. One of the things that I like about this map is, and it does in fact remind me again of, for those of you who've been to New York or to Manhattan or anything like that, it is a bit like a Manhattan map, as in Manhattan map goes all the way from the Bronx down to Battery, and they often look like this. I mean, there's cutouts from where the East River is and where the Hudson is and everything else, but broadly there's a similarity to this that's sort of refreshing and reminds me of New York maps. In the Planescape setting, there are two main... well, not two concepts. There is a concept of a thing called a faction, and there's a thing called a sect. A sect is exactly what you would assume it to be. It is a large group that is organized and attempts to wield influence and power through its members. The main definition of a sect is that it is not based in Sigil, as in the headquarters are not in Sigil, as opposed to the factions. And the factions are interesting because basically the factions are very highly philosophically aligned. There are, I believe, 15 or so factions. There might be more. There might be sub-factions. There may be other things. No, I think there's a wealth of wonderful content you can find on the interwebs. But the 15 or so factions all have a particular obsession. Now, if I recall correctly, in the original mythology, and that's all I'm talking about, right now. I'm not talking about how we're going to adapt it or mess around with it for or two, because I think that will be an exercise in and of itself, which is how we're going to look at something which is built with the original D&D in mind, even as trend-setting as it was, and make it less Eurocentric. Well, before we get to that, let's just talk about what it originally it was, right? And so originally you had these 15 different factions, and though the Lady of Pain was considered the ultimate ruler of Sigil, factions actually did the majority of day stuff, because the thing with Lady of Pain is if you showed up and went, excuse me, Lady of Pain, you would find your the outside of your skin would be, now facing the air, and possibly the outside of your intestines as well. She's a terrifying, if not goddess, then demigoddess, and certainly, incredibly powerful being, and didn't really make time for her paperwork. So she just does what she wants to, and you just don't really interact with her if at all possible. There are 15 factions in total. It's a decree of the Lady of Pain, and any additional factions are not tolerated. She's like, nope, we're done. 15, that's it. That's your unions. If you want to do more, that's your problem, not mine. And she has and will cull or punish anybody that does otherwise. Now, there were, in fact, many more factions previously towards that, but the Lady of Pain apparently decreed that they had 2 weeks to get the number down to 15, or she would kill all of them. Factions, 15 of them. The Free League grew a lot when the Lady of Pain said, fuck you guys, you're getting down to 15 factions. So apparently it grew up to over 1 million, as opposed to the 20 or 1,000 members that they have now. Factions are led by a factol, or a factotum, I guess, and with other high-ranking faction members called factors. Athar, known as the Defiers or the Lost, they deny not only the gods' right to pass judgment over mortals, but their very divinity. They claim that the gods, who they call powers, are powerful but have limits and do not deserve worship. Instead, Athar priests channel divine power from what they call the Great Unknown, or what they believe to be the true divine source behind everything. The headquarters in Sigil is the Shattered Temple, the former temple of the dead god Oscar. Following the faction war and banned from Sigil, they moved their headquarters to the base of the Infinite Spire, where the divine magic does not function in protection of many of the gods they have offended. They're broadly meant to be associated with real-world agnostics and deists. The inside here is actually, Sigil itself. And then there's more donut, because if you think about it, you're building a building here, so your basement's going to be this way, right? And then you kind of move out through it here until the outer hub here. So, and that's how I'd always thought about it, rather than it being an enclosed thing where the inner ring and the outer ring actually match up to each other. Here we go. So the believers of the source, who are known as the godsmen, they believe that life is a test and each person has the potential to become a god. So really, they're pretty much cultivators, one might say. Their headquarters is the Great Foundry, symbolizing their belief that the multiverse constantly forges and refines all beings. The ultimate goal, however, of the godsman is not nirvana, but is, in fact, apotheosis, which is this idea that says that you can become a deity in some ways. You can transcend not from not to be liberated from the wheel of life itself and what difficulties there are in that. Instead, it's not about the escape from samsara. It is about the growth of power into a divine being. The Athar, the Defiers of the Lost. So, and I remember this art. I loved this art. This art was so very, it was sort of that style. Reminded me of Time Bandits. I think it was Time Bandits. So the godsmen are here. To these characters, all things are godly. All things can ascend to greater glory. If not in this life, then the next. We're all one. Gods, mortals, even fiends come from the same source. Who knows? Maybe next time you'll be a lava, says Factol Ambar of the Godsmen. The Godsmen are open to all races, classes, and alignments. However, priests of dead suffer -1 penalty on all saving throws for the lack of the utmost faith in their high-up man. So this is obviously second edition D&D rules, so as a result, is not the same. So the Bleak Cabal. So basically, they're basically saying no belief system has any significant merit. The universe has some rules, but there's really very little in the way of genuine metaphysical rules. And so, any meaning from life must come from within. The headquarters is the insane asylum of Sigil, called the Gatehouse. They're derived from existentialists and Nietzschean kind of philosophy. Is sort of the argument that the Wikipedia puts forward. I mean, but certainly there's no meaning to it all. So the factions just give it up, or sod. Whoever said reality had to make sense. To these folks, the multiverse ain't even a cruel joke, because that would give it all meaning. Here is the bleaker credo. The multiverse doesn't make sense and ain't supposed to. That's all there is to it, pure and simple. It ain't the multiverse is without meaning, because that's a statement of meaning in itself. Therefore, the primes, practitioners, petitioners, and proxies don't have the answer. No one has the answer. Nobody's here for any higher purpose. Things just are, and whatever is. What I like about, as you can see, what I like about this so far is that they've got a very strong perspective on things, right? So, you're considered mad by oath. Devotees are immune to spells causing madness or insanity. So you do get benefits for joining and espousing this philosophy as well. Let's have a look. Subject to fits of deep melancholia. Each start of each game day, the player rolls a d20. On the roll of a 20, the character is overcome by the futility of his or her beliefs. Basically, you just have a bad day. What's the phrase here? Hear the barmies howling in the mazes. If you're here to learn the secrets of the multiverse, you might as well save yourself some time and go join them, because that's all it means. That and nothing else. It's just factual law. The Doom Guard. There are some rather famous ones. I think the Doom Guard is pretty well known. So the Doom Guard. Ever hear of entropy, Berk? Take a look around. Everything's going down the tubes, falling apart, stopping. People die, rocks erode, stars fade, planes melt away. That's entropy, that is. The fate of the multiverse. A lot of folks think that's a terrible thing, but not the Doom Guard. They're pretty sure nothing lasts forever, not even the planes. It's the way things are supposed to be, they guess. The goal of everything. It's a bit more nihilistic, I guess, is the view. Doom Guard's basically here to see that the multiverse gets its way. It's supposed to crumble. Things are supposed to break, and they are not here to let people fix them by doing such things as striving against entropy. They maintain a great sit-still on each of the negative quasi-planes. Their core belief is that everything ends. Their headquarters are in Sigil's armory, and they forge various tools and weapons as their the thing they do. Maybe they do at weekends, really. Anyone can be a Doom Guard. It's a very military and organizational outlook. All members are trained to fight. Doom Guard naturally resistant to healing and cures. For any such spell or magical device to have effect, the Doom Guard must fail a saving throw. So basically, you're getting +1 to attack, but kind of sucks. Can't get healed. That's shit. The Dustman. Now, if you're familiar with Planescape Torment, and I am not particularly, I played it a little bit, then kind of it's very involving. The Dustmen are where I believe, you wake up in Planescape Torment. It's the start of the game. Dustmen say, these guys say life's a joke, great trick, nobody's alive. In fact, there's no such thing as life. The petitioners are dead compared to the rest of us, but everyone else is dead too. They just don't know it yet. If things were truly alive, would there be such pain and misery in the multiverse? Of course not. Life is about celebration and positive feelings. Existence is muted, dull, full of pain and twisted with sorrow. Kind of celebration is that. So the Dustmen, in essence, are they believe both life and death are false states of existence, and there is a state of true death which can only be accomplished by denying one's emotions and physical wants and needs. In essence, oblivion, or in some ways you could argue that it's like a ascetic approach to samsara. Ascetic approach to nirvana. Their headquarters is the mortuary where Sigil's dead are interred or cremated, and their philosophy is apparently closely related to that of Schopenhauer. For those of you who are familiar with Schopenhauer, I only know him from the Philosopher's Song by Monty Python. He is a German philosopher and best known for his 1818 work, The World as Will and Representation, which characterizes the phenomenal world, something like a phenomenal, as a product of blind noumenal will. A noumenal is an event that exists independently of human sense and perception. Cool. So basically, a transcendent idealist like Immanuel Kant, he developed an atheistic, metaphysical, and ethical system that rejected the contemporaneous ideas of German idealism. He was amongst the first Western thinkers in Western philosophy to share and affirm significant tenets of Indian philosophy, asceticism, denial of self, and the notion of world as appearance, i.e. Maya. So he's a philosophical pessimist. So apparently they are philosophical pessimists like Schopenhauer. For those of you who are curious about Immanuel Kant, real pissant, very rarely stable. High digger, boozy beggar, drink you under the table. for those of you who are at all familiar with Monty Python's Philosopher's Song. So these are the fated. The takers or heartless believe those with power and the ability to own what they control and take what they can from those who are unable to keep it. And it is their right to exploit any situation to their advantage, regardless of how it affects anyone. Their headquarters is a hall of records. They serve as tax collectors. In essence, this is the Ayn Rand people, basically. Fuckers. I guess social Darwinism, if you want to call it that. The Zuckerbergs, if you will. The faction says the multiverse belongs to those who can hold it. Each sod makes its own fate, and there's no one else to blame for it. Those who whine about their luck are just weak. If they were meant to succeed, they could have. This is the way the multiverse works, according to the takers. Everybody's got the potential to be great, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. It takes work and sweat for things to come true, not just a lot of hoping. Those that work hard get what they deserve. Nothing's free, not in this life or any other. Proof? Well, look at these poor petitioners. Can they just sit back and wait for their rewards? No. The powers put them through the mill with all kinds of trials. A lot of them fail and die permanent little deaths. But those that have the strength and the will reach the reward. There's no point feeling sorry for the Berks who didn't make good. It was their own fault for being weak. Some soft-hearted folks call this a cruel philosophy, saying there's no compassion in it. Well, that's just an excuse for weakness. Sure, there's compassion, but a body's still got to earn it. The best way to keep from being hurt is to be strong enough to fight back. Most folks think there's nothing to the fated but the taking. But the takers tell a Berk it's more than that. There's lots of things a being has to earn, and he can't get them all by force. The body's got to have some respect too. That's something that can't get got with force. There's happiness too. The basher's got to go out and make happiness. No amount of hitting people's going to get that. It takes kindness without weakness, compassion without cowardice. Next time somebody snivels about their lot in life, said the takers, just remember the powers give them the wherewithal to get on with their life. It ain't not nobody else's fault if they ain't going to use it. Blah, blah, blah. So what do you get? Obviously, I suspect eligibility. Any race and class, lawful good characters can't join the fated because they're assholes. Closest to the Free League and the 12 McCrory Merciless also, we'll talk about these later. And they don't accept the might make right attitude of the takers. The Merciless are kind of cool allies, apparently. Harmonian thinks they're wrong-headed and dangerous. The fated, the great believers in self-sufficiency. They start with twice the number of proficiency slots, not relevant. You can get any proficiency from anything. This is a very AD&D sort of thing. Adherents to this philosophy can't accept or perform charity in any capacity. Anything they receive, they must be earned in one fashion or another, and the service must be provided before the payment is given. The governors, or governor, the governors believe that knowledge is power. They learn and exploit both the natural laws of the universe and the laws of society. Their headquarters is the city court, where they serve as judges and legal advocates, and these are broadly modelled on the Athenian sophists. For those of you who are unfamiliar with your history of Greek philosophy, the sophists are ancient teachers in ancient Greece. A sophist is a teacher in ancient Greece for the 5th and 4th centuries BC. They specialized in one or more subject areas such as philosophy, rhetoric, music, and mathematics. They thought aret, which means virtue or excellence, predominantly to young statesmen and nobility. Good examples of them were Protagoras, not to be confused with Pythagoras. He's on the other side of the triangle. And Gorgias, who was pretty good. On the other hand, however, Plato, who actually wrote about the sophists' writing, Plato's dialogue were pretty hostile to the sophist thought, who he basically considered responsible for kind of like basically taking money and just teaching shit. So he says that Socrates didn't like him very much. So the fraternity were the governors. They make sure everything's got laws. They basically, these are your lawful, neutral, mechanist type people. Governors considered useful by many. They're strong allies of Merciless who uphold laws, close to the Harmoniums. They're not really the chaotic type. Doomguard don't like them because they think that they're trying to keep the world alive. Eligibility, where anyone can join the fraternity of order. Benefits. They can automatically comprehend languages once a day, and on 7th level, they gain enough knowledge of the multiverse to use item, whatever item is, I can't remember what it is. Item, found it. By means of this spell, the wizard is able to shrink one non-magical item to 1/12 of its normal size. You can take a non-magical item, you can turn it into a piece of cloth, and then you can return it back to its original state. That's pretty cool. The Free League, the Independents. This ain't no faction and nobody tells them what to do. So it's anybody who wants to call themselves an independent, they're sort of the anarchs. They can do what they like. It's sort of a centaur goatee person. Nice. Sort of, I don't need your mumbo jumbo. Fair enough. The harmonium. Secret Multiverse is simple, and every customer in the harmonium knows what it is. The harmonium is always right. The goal of any enlightened being is to live in perfect harmony with others. Peace or war, there's only one true state of the multiverse. So, if we recall where we were a second ago. So we said the fraternity of order is the governors, they're the sophists. The indepts are meant to be kind of libertarian, but they don't consider themselves to be a faction and a bunch of other things like that. They believe in individual freedom as the highest good. Then you have the harmonium, who believe that peace and stability can only be established under one rule, so which is theirs, of course they are, which is your average sort of tyrannical despots, but they would consider themselves to be enlightened despots. The planar faction known as the harmonium is just a small part of a much larger political entity which rules over the entirety of the prime material world of Ortho. In Sigil, they serve as the city's police force, and their headquarters are the city barracks. They are basically authoritarian, but they have a bunch of traits of evangelicism and fundamentalism. They don't like the term hardhead. So they are strongest in the plane of Arcadia, where everything likes to be ordered. Fierce devotion to order. Everyone's welcome. All good stuff. The Mercy Killers, the Red Death. Well, you want to say that's Road Warrior, look at that. So, the Mercy Killers believe in justice and retribution at the expense of all else. Their name does not come from killing people out of mercy, rather, killing mercy. Their credo is that mercy is for the weak, and merciful should be punished. Their headquarters is in Sigil's prison, where they carry out sentences of convicted criminals. So, the Mercy Killers are, basically justice is absolutely imperfect, but it's got to be collectively applied. You know, somebody's got to know the Knights of the Post, the criminals from the innocent, so he doesn't make a mistake. Mercy is an excuse created by the weak and criminal. They think they can rob or kill and then escape their crime. So basically, this is the cop that's seen too many people get away with it all and turns into a brutal vigilante type trope. But in this case, the Mercy Killers are just a bunch of psychos. Every Mercy Killer can detect lie to a single question once a day. Only lawful alignments. You have to obey the law. It's just very... The Revolutionary League, who are the actual anarchists, they believe the social order and man-made laws are inherently corrupt and must be destroyed, although none of their members can agree on what, if anything, should replace them. Rather like the Indepts, they have no headquarters. So this is yet again, even back then, anarchists and libertarians sort of sitting at the end of the toroid from each other. The Signer of One. I saw the sign. They believe that everyone is the center of their own reality, and that reality can be shaped by the power of imagination. The headquarters of the Hall of Speakers, which houses Sigil's legislature. Some of them are solipsist and most are not so extreme. So every person, every individual is unique, like a flower. This is the greatest glory of the universe, that each creature, living and dead, is different from all others. It's obvious, then, that the multiverse centers around the self. Well, this faction would have everyone believe that anyway. It is quite simple, Adulco, one of the sods would say. The world exists because the mind imagines it. Without the self, the multiverse ceases to be. Therefore, each signer is the most important person in the multiverse. Without at least one signer to imagine it all, the rest of the factions would cease to exist. So basically, if a tree falls in the woods, does it fall or not? Well, depends if the signer's there to see it. Better be nice to the signers then, Berk, because they might decide to imagine a body right out of existence. Don't think it can be done? Maybe not. But then a basher's going to be a fool to take the risk. Signer 1 is open to all classes and races, however, lawful good and lawful neutral characters may find adhering to the one's beliefs difficult at best. Because they believe all the world is created from within, signers are hard to fool with illusions. You get a saving throw, blah, blah, blah. So there's not that much of a difference in some ways between the signers and the ones earlier on who believed in, the idea of Maya. So where is the center of the multiverse? Me! I'm the center of the multiverse. The Society of Sensation. For those of you who don't know what the word solipsism is a philosophical idea that only one's mind is sure to exist. It's the sort of like the Cartesian proof of things. So as an epistemological position, solipsism holds that knowledge of anything outside of one's own mind is unsure. The external world and other minds cannot be known and might not exist outside of the mind. And so, briefly, this sort of comes from, sort of Descartes. Well, it comes before that, apparently Georgius, who was, as we talked earlier, the Greek sophist, was a solipsist. He was first recorded in 483 BC, who said, nothing exists. Even if something existed, nothing can be known about it. Even if something could be known about it, it could not be communicated to others. The idea being that objective knowledge is non-existent. And the foundations of solipsism kind of like lead to the concept of Descartes, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, but the logic that Descartes had was if you were a brain in a jar, how would you ever know? If there was a demon and the demon's only goal was to spend its life deluding you, and deluding you into believing that your reality exists. You're a brain in a jar, you're in the matrix, all that kind of stuff. So what would you be able to know? And so Descartes' position was, well, I'm unable to know anything about my truth. My senses could be lied to me. I am unable to know anything about what I feel, what I touch, what I see, what I smell, because all of these things, I could be a brain in a jar, I could be in the matrix, all of these things could be tricks, and I could be wired up, and all of these impulses just fire in my brain. What about my thoughts? Could I know the fact that I am thinking about a bird? No. And so the idea being, however, that the only thing you could think about and know for a fact is that you were thinking about thinking itself, as in your metacognition was there. Metacognition is thought. Therefore, the only thing I can know is that my thoughts exist. The existence of all other things other than my own mental knowledge is up for question, right? But what is not up for question is the fact that I'm thinking about it. The logic is therefore saying that, if you take this further, that it's impossible to know anything that is outside of your mind. Therefore, you could take further, everything is either within your mind or it does not exist until it is within your mind. It is a psychologically interesting place, but easily one could say that surely this is just the way that Buddhists or Advaita Vedanta Hindus look at things. The reality is that there's a difference, though. I don't think that anybody considers that in either Buddhism or otherwise that other minds do not exist and aren't necessarily struggling with the same problems. Where solipsism would argue that is not true, that the only person that exists is me, and the only experience that I can provably exist is my own subjective one. So the sensates believe that accumulating experiential knowledge through the senses is the only way to achieve enlightenment, kind of like the opposite of the solipsists. In fact, if anything, they're a bit more like the Epicureans, the old Greek Epicureans, led by Epicurus of, I want to say, Crete, but maybe not. You hate yourself, therefore you are. Smackus ergo sum. Yes. So the sensates are the more kind of empirical, experiential folks. Now, according to these folks, the multiverse is only known by the senses, and these are the only proofs of existence. Without experience, without sensation, a thing isn't. If a sod can't taste the soup, then it ain't soup. If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, and fucks like a duck, it's a duck. The only way to know anything for sure is to use the senses. That is why you call your teacher sensei, right? Anyway, moving on. It is not that hard to understand, blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of like the opposite. They're both egocentric factions, as it points out here. Both the sensates and the signers are both egocentric. And they, oddly enough, they will actually cooperate. They are rather sort of opposed to the Doom Guard. Anyone can join. You get lots of good +1 to your senses stuff back in 2nd edition D&D. Touch it, smell it, taste it, see it, hit it. The Transcendent Order, the Ciphers. These guys say that for a body to become one with the multiverse, that body has to stop thinking and act. It's like, don't think, feel. When a cutter can know what to do without even thinking about it, then he's become one with the multiverse. So, again, elements of some Tao or Hindu things of the concept of Dvandva from the Bhagavad Gita, of action or inaction, but non but it must be a conscious decision. The idea of I'm sure that there are concepts in Tao of being aligned with one's Tao. And so action without thought is the purest form of thought, because all things are thought. When a cutter can know what to do without even thinking about it, then they become one with the multiverse. It goes like this. Every Berk's part of the multiverse and nothing apart from it. So it figures that every being knows the right action to take and just the right moment. Problem is, some folks start thinking and mess it all up. Thinking adds hesitation and doubt. It overrules instinct and separates the sod from the multiverse. By the time the poor sod thought about something, the right action for the moment is gone. So what Berk's got to do is just quit thinking, right? Of course, it ain't that easy. Any adult code can blunder in and act without giving it a thought. But that's not the goal. A body's got to work hard at learning himself, learning his own mind and instincts until the right action comes automatically. It's done by training both the body and mind. Just like the way thieves practice their cross-trade, a cipher's got to train his mind, the source of action, and the body, the actor, to be one thing. There's no difference between the two, no separation between thought and motion. Body and mind act as one. The hand moves before the thought reaches it. So, what's all this get a fellow then? Once mind and body are in harmony, the spirit becomes in tune with the multiverse. The blood understands the purpose of the multiverse and knows just where and how they should be. Elysian sort of concept, rather nice, and gets +1 initiative, which for such a very, very cool philosophy seems a little weak. Again, awesome art of some sort of tiefling, I presume, because of the hoovy horns. Their headquarters is the Great Gymnasium, and basically their goal is that by tapping into the cadence of the planes and acting through pure instinct, they can achieve a higher state of being. The final group, I think it's meant to be Chaositects. But obviously I'm looking at this going, is that Xiaoxitect? What? No, it's not, because Xiao. So that's obviously not a word that's meant to be pronounced. Maybe it's Chaositect. Anyway, irrespective, the Chaos Men, or Chaos people, as these sorts see it, the multiverse wasn't born from chaos. The multiverse is chaos. There's no order, no pattern to everything. That's the meaning of the multiverse. The great secret everyone else is just too dull-witted and cowardly to admit. Look around. Leaves are brown. And the sky is a hazy shade of wind. Look around. Is there any pattern to this existence? Any order that gives it all meaning? None. Not a one. The only order is one that the adult code governors and harmonium try to impose on it. Their order isn't natural to the multiverse. Why? The minute they leave, the multiverse reverts to its natural state of disorganization and chaos. So rather than these people being the Doom Guard who actively want to destroy stuff, these people are more just like, well, it just is what it is, mate. It's just all a bit, entropy is the only reality. The sky is clearly some sort of Gith Zerai or Githyanki, I presume, one way or the other. But again, there's some tropey shit here. Anyone can become a chaos crew. They're committed to the power of chaos. Beautiful is chaos. Too dim multiverses to notice most the of, says Factor Karen the idiot. I think you would probably play this more as a genuine chaos person. Now, the clueless, apparently, are slightly different. So let's have a look at this, right? So the clueless are pretty much no faction, no philosophy, just your general scrubbers, your Berks and other people who've just shown up. Hi, is this Waterdeep? In essence, in the faction war, it is worth pointing out, many factions were destroyed or merged. So the Athar, who fled to the base of the spire, they were just bugger off, basically. The Doom Guard rarely leave their citadels, making forays only when some great act of creation demands that they get involved. The Fated suffered a great loss of faith. They moved their base of operation to Asgard, but have changed very little of their methods. The Fraternity of Order relocated to Mecanus. The Harmonium relocated to Arcadia. It is what it is, permeated American culture so thoroughly that it shows up in movies, t-shirts, blah, blah, and pretty much everywhere. Even politicians use the phrase regularly. Yep, it is what it is. The Harmonium also relocated to Arcadia, become less of a police force, more of a diplomatic body. They believe the best way to spread order is to unite the upper planes in the banner of law. The Mind's Eye merged from the Believers in the Source and the Sign of One. The Revolutionary League retreated to Carcery, and that changed. The Ring Givers, who believe that everything you give will be given back to you one day, they appeared. The Sod Killers believe in exterminating crime with any force necessary. And one of the two factions that long ago joined to make the Mercy Killers and divided after the faction war. Interesting. So, like, after this is what happened. So, the Sons of Mercy, not to be confused with the Sisters of Mercy, are concerned with redeeming and rehabilitating criminals. One of the two factions made the Mercy Killers and now are split. The Transcendent Order are still the same. So, in essence, apparently Zeb Cook, the creator of Planescape, when asked for a 3-word summary of what the Planescape experience was, he said, "Philosophers with clubs." That's pretty awesome, and I like that. Sigil is rife with philosophical factions, all of which have their own take on how the universe works and what it's about. Each faction is continuously struggling to gain combats from other factions and to hang on to what they've got. Because the more people who believe in the basic laws of the universe work a certain way, the more the universe just works that way. Alignment and philosophy are more than just role-playing tools. They're the main point. Now, for me, given I don't really do alignment as a kind of like chaotic neutral or lawful evil or whatever, but I do a lot of philosophy in our games, it's awesome. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, so Big Mac says, well, what about fourth ed cosmology? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. It's just they change their beliefs in Sigil, and then the reality changes. Right? So you made A, and now you think you're tough because you can cast some spells and fly around in your silver cord. Well, I've got news for you, Berk. I live out here and I was born tough, so why don't you just fly back home, eh? Welcome, Battle Cove. Welcome to Worlds Beyond Your World, the great wheel of the cosmos. This is the great place where else can a poor sod mingle with mighty minions of the great powers, or sail the astral ocean, or visit the flaming courts of the city of brass, or even battle fiends on their own home turf. Hey, welcome to the lands of the living and the lands of the dead. So, where to begin? Sigil, of course. There ain't no other place worth beginning. Sigil, the city of doors. This town's the gateway to everything and everywhere that matters. Step through one door and enter the halls of Asgard, or turn down a particular alley and discover the abyss. There are more gateways in Sigil than can be imagined. With all those doors, Sigil's a useful place and then some. Want to share a drink with a friend? Or maybe discuss philosophy with a daver? Here it can happen in the same day, the same afternoon, even at the same table. Nothing's too unlikely for Sigil. Strange folks abound here, and any one of them might prove ally or foe. Where else in Sigil do humans, elves, dwarves, Githzerai, Barriors, and Tieflings form adventuring companies? Barriors being these goat centaur people that didn't really kind of like carry on in D&D much. Form adventuring companies. Where but in Sigil can a well-heeled cutter hire a Githyanki ship or a legion of Yugoloth mercs? This is the place to live and die. No surprise every basher out there wants Sigil. The cage be a pearl for any Tanari prince or Batizu lord. So Tanari and Batizu were what devils and demons, I believe, were called other way around. Sorry, demons and devils were called respectively. Pardon me. This is back during Satanic Panic. So because Satanic Panic's going on, they didn't want to use the terms devils and demons anymore, especially because the person that ran TSR was very, very seemed very religious. It was what I heard anyway. So let's see. So that birdcage has got more ways to close the doors than folks know about. And there's the mazes, nasty little places Sigil makes for would-be dictators. Those that get caught inside go balmy, poor Berks. Sometimes they scream so much a body can hardly stand it. But there's a lot more out there than just Sigil. Get out of the city and there's plains themselves, the throne of the gods, the battleground of the eternal blood war, and home to more horrors and wonders than ever existed on any prime world. There's enough crusades to exploit its treasures and mysteries to keep abandoned adventurers busy for centuries to come. Though why a body'd want to go some of those places is beyond reasoning. All it takes is the right door. So step right through. So let's see. It was page 10 I think we were going to get to, which is where we thought maybe there'd be something about the Lady of Pain. Here we go. The planes have mysteries, Cutter, and not all of them have answers. Walk the planes long enough, and that's something you'll take to heart. Some things just are. You don't question them, you don't fight them, and you don't so much as stand them in their way. They just exist and you accept it. Not the Lady of Pain, no. the Lady of Pain, capitals. Her serenity, her dread majesty, and the ultimate power in Sigil, perhaps anywhere else, it's reckoned by some. She keeps and controls the portals of the City of Doors, and she bars the powers from entering. So that's another thing that's worth noting. So the Lady of Pain basically says, I'm sorry, I don't care if you're a god or not, but you're not welcome in my town. So she bans the gods from coming to Sigil, and she will kick off big stuff. She keeps and controls the portals, and she bars the powers from entering. Appearing as a tall robed woman with her face sprouting a halo, and headdress of blades from her very flesh, she floats silently above the streets of Sigil. She's the protector of Sigil, and by all of its inhabitants. Not that she really cares very much about them, but any threats to Sigil itself or her own power, and she kicks off big style. During these select few times in Sigil's history, how terrible her fury has been, and most cages prefer to forget these occurrences. From time to time, she may randomly float down an avenue, passively observing before vanishing around a corner without trace. Wise bloods look away and avert their eyes or quickly find business elsewhere. She never speaks, never has a history of Sigil as far as many can know. In the scant few times she's needed to make her will known, she's done so through her servant, the Dabus, as she floats silently behind them, never a mark of emotion crossing her face. Not that it is wise to stare into her countenance. She's not a god, get that straight. She's something else, more or less. None know the dark of it, but never worship her, not even in jest. Those that do are found dead, their skin flayed from their bones, seen walking through Sigil when the lady appears, and her shadow reaches out to strike them. Pardon me. Wherever her bladed, serrated shadow touches, their body erupts with slashes, wounds, and gouges as if from a storm of knives and razors. None have ever survived the touch of a shadow, nor have any been successfully resurrected afterwards. They die, that is a certain, for when she acts with certainty. The chant even goes centuries ago. Before the great upheaval, the lady penned a true deity into the dead book, Auska, the self-proclaimed portal father and patron of planewalkers and opportunity. She killed him, simple as that. Some say it's because she offended him or wanted it. So, long ago, the Shattered Temple district before it gained its name, and the Athar claimed the ruins as their own. The Shattered Temple was the Height Temple of Auska. At its height, Auska claimed nearly half the residents of the caves as worshippers, with many of them whispering a prayer to him before passing into or out this portal to Sigil. In fact, eventually the worship became nearly synonymous with the City of Doors itself. And a time came when Berks began to worship the Lady of Pain as an aspect of him. Whatever his ultimate reasons, Oscar's final offense to the lady was when one of the Dabbers took up the robes of his priesthood and endorsed the worship of the Father of Portals, forsaking her serenity in doing so. That Dabbus, still alive and forsaken by his own kind, is known as Fel. None beside him and the lady know what true dark of what exactly happened, save that the temple and all within were obliterated in what would be called by some great beers as the Day of Blades and Fury. The temple was reduced to rubble, along with the city surrounding it, and Oscar, along with all of his mortal worshippers throughout the multiverse, were killed by the lancing shadow of her serenity in a single moment of horror. Some claim to have seen the withered husk of Oscar upon the astral, a stony face locked into a gasp of terror, one petrified arm raised as if to ward up some attack, and pierced through with glimmering metallic blades. The symbols and trapping of the faith of Oscar have since been considered anathema within Sigil. Such was her fury that day to not only kill a greater power, but all of his mortal host as well. Such are the lengths that she'll go to protect her city and her position. Basically, she don't fuck around. And she got the power. Speculation of the true nature of the lady is rife among scholars and sages and the common folk of Sigil alike, but answers are never forthcoming from any source. Still, the common chant, most likely the shriek without scripted proof, holds a number of common myths. Some say that she's a mortal who found Sigil and granted herself immeasurable power. Others say she's a renegade, or risen Tanari Lord, or Demon Lord, from the Abyss. Others say that she hacked from a double egg, whatever that is, by Io, the draconic overpower. A few even suggest she may simply be an illusion of the Dabus themselves, or their queen, Dabudi Dabuda, much like the bees in the hive. Now dead sages, rumoured mazed or flayed, have all claimed that the lady is not the ruler of Sigil, but its ultimate prisoner. After all, why might it be called the cage? Some have compared the lady to an overpower, or some unique but non-divine being, so ancient as to defy mortal definitions, a being who exists to keep Sigil free of any and all divine influences, perhaps in an attempt to balance the planes themselves. Of course, not a shred of proof exists to shed a light upon the mystery, and those who seek to delve too deeply into the lady's secrets tend to vanish without a trace, gone, whisked away on the winds of oblivion. What I like about that is the fact that they've done the thing they do it in Eberron as well, which is that there is a central mystery that's right up front and center. In Eberron, it's what caused the end of the war, the thing that was the destruction of the nation of Sire. In this, it's who the fuck is the Lady of Pain, and they just don't explain it. It's just not a thing. Pretty decent. We talked about the Lady of Pain. We talked about Sigil itself. We've talked about how that all relates to the Outer Planes. If you want to see Survey Team 3 do its stuff and get a bit of an introduction to Sigil, join us on Monday evening at 7 p.m. Singapore time. And I will see you all